Jamaica ranks 25th worldwide in prostitution revenue, according to a 2014 study by website Havascope.com, which tracks black market earnings. It says that Jamaica earned around US $58 million from prostitution. But like most of the Caribbean, it's illegal on the island, but it is tolerated. So if prostitution is tolerated in the Caribbean, would we have more to gain as a region if it were legalized? Joining us now from New York City via Skype to discuss is Liesl Gerntholtz, Executive Director of the Women's Rights Division of the Human Rights Watch, who's been advocating for the decriminalization of sex work. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Why is it that you advocate for decriminalization of sex work?
Well, our research, and that's supported by research all over the world, shows that in terms of protecting women who are in sex work, the best way to do that is by decriminalizing it.
And what's your evidence that decriminalization of sex work actually helps a country?
Decriminalization and legalization is a relatively new phenomenon, so there is not a lot of evidence either way. New Zealand has a very good model. Sex workers are protected by employment laws. They have very rigorous healthcare and access to healthcare for sex workers. And in essence, they have a program that really tries to combat stigma.
There are women today, for instance, I was reading an article on Amnesty's website, this Jamaican woman talking about the fact that police, when they come to pick her up for prostitution, to take her down to the jailhouse, they usually say, okay, I'll take some sex for free instead. And so they're basically victimized in that way. How does decriminalization help that?
They're afraid to lay criminal charges because they know that they're doing something illegal, and that pushes them away from access to justice. So we know that very often abuse of sex workers goes unreported and unpunished. So that's one big reason. Another reason is that the criminalization of sex work, as I've mentioned before, really contributes to stigma. There's sex workers who may want to leave sex work, but again, because of the discrimination they face, they're often unable to get jobs.
What women's rights would you say are affected by prostitution being criminalized?
We know that, for example, sex workers have extremely high rates of HIV because they aren't able to access protective and prevention services.
I see.
But where there has been very targeted and quite sort of deep outreach to sex workers, you are beginning to see a decrease in HIV amongst sex workers.
I see.
For example, South Africa is a country that is beginning to bring down the rates of HIV amongst sex workers because they are developing and funding programs that specifically target sex workers.
What about human trafficking? How does decriminalizing help that situation?
There's some evidence that suggests that it is in fact helpful because, firstly, where you have sex or you have trafficking of women and of girls, it is in the interests of those women and girls to have people who are engaged voluntarily in sex work to be able to go to police officers and say, you know, I'm aware of this particular brothel or I'm aware of this particular place where women are being forced or trafficked.
You've studied decriminalization in places like the Netherlands and New Zealand. What are the benefits of decriminalization in those areas? And be honest with us, what are some of the drawbacks that should another Caribbean country want to jump on the bandwagon? What should they be aware of?
I'm not sure that when you weigh up the pros and cons, that there are any cons that are worth mentioning. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat and suggest that sex work is a fantastic way for women to earn a living. What I am saying is that there's always been sex work. Attempts that have been made over the ages to eradicate it have been unsuccessful. And so for me, the best way to protect women and girls is to make sure that those who are doing sex work can do it safely. So I don't see any benefits for women to continue criminalization.
For somebody who is really religious, what do you say to the person when you're making a pitch to decriminalize prostitution or sex work?
Those people who are familiar with the Bible will remember Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene, who was a sex worker, and where he made it very clear that his job as as the Christ was to deal with those people, the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, the outcasts of society. So I would remind people who want to advocate on a religious basis that, that is what the Bible has told us. It's been very clear that our job as Christians is really to reach out to people who are ostracized and marginalized in society. The other argument is criminalization makes women vulnerable to a whole range of abuses. It means that they can't protect their rights, and I don't think that is the intention of the Bible or of Christianity, to put women in a position where we have the power to help them, but we choose not to.
Liesl, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for your time.
Our thanks to Liesl Gerntholtz, the Executive Director of the Women's Division at Human Rights Watch in New York City. They're rude and sometimes raunchy. Dancehall moves that border on the extreme to capture the video light.
Sometimes the music just liquor, you can't help it, but just do the things that...
But is the need for this attention worth the risk? And is there more money to be made from playing it safe? That story next on 18 Degrees North.